Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, September 16, 2025. FBI Director Kash Patel testifies before the Senate Judiciary Committee about accusations the agency is being politicized, whether all the Epstein files will be released, and his handling of the investigation into the shooting death of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Utah County's Attorney General says the suspect in the Kirk shooting is being charged with aggravated murder. An aggravating factor is that Kirk was targeted for his political beliefs, and the state will pursue the death penalty. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, who was himself targeted for his views, calls on all political violence to be condemned. U.S. House will be voting on an additional $30 million for additional security for members of Congress and $28 million for Supreme Court justices. House Republicans present a 7-week temporary federal government spending bill to prevent a government shutdown at the end of the month, but Democrats are opposing it because it does not make changes they're seeking to healthcare programs. The House takes up a bill to allow 14-year-old defendants in Washington, D.C. charged with violent crimes to be tried as adults. Plus, President Donald Trump flies to Great Britain for a state visit. We'll get reaction to Israel's ground assault on Gaza City, and actor and activist Robert Redford has died. Associated Press writes that FBI Director Kash Patel clashed with skeptical Democrats at a contentious Senate oversight hearing Tuesday, defending his record amid criticism that he has politicized the nation's premier federal law enforcement agency and pursued retribution against perceived adversaries of President Donald Trump. The appearance Tuesday before the Senate Judiciary Committee represented the first oversight hearing of Patel's young but tumultuous tenure and provided a high-stakes platform for him to try to demonstrate that he is the right person for the job at a time of internal upheaval and mounting concerns about political violence inside the United States, a threat laid bare by last week's killing of conservative activist Charlie Kirk at a college campus in Utah. That was the article from Associated Press. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, accused Director Patel of lying when he said at his confirmation hearing that he would not pursue retribution. AP says 5 agents and top-level executives were known to have been summarily fired last month in a purge that current and former officials say has contributed to declining morale. Here's part of the exchange between Senator Blumenthal and Director Patel.
There is mounting evidence that these retaliatory firings were the result of direction from the White House. There have been instances in the past history of the Bureau of political interference and political direction from the director's office, but not the kind of institutional interference that we're seeing from the White House right now. I'm going to ask you, has anyone from the White House contacted you about personnel decisions?
I completely disagree with your entire premise that I have lied or am misleading the FBI. If I were, the results that I announced today by the men and women of the FBI and the historic records we are doing to keep this country safe would not be possible. The men and women of the FBI are responding to our leadership and this administration's priorities. The only way people get terminated at the FBI is if they fail to meet the muster of the job and their duties, and that is where I will leave it. And you accusing me of lying is something I don't take lightly, but I'm not going to get into a tit-for-tat with you.
Well, let me just ask you to answer my question. Has anyone from the White House contacted you about personnel decisions?
Generally speaking, we always discuss with the White House, OMB, during the budget process, how many personnel we need, who we need where.
Answer is yes.
For budgetary purposes and
to fire people, agents, because they participated in investigations of the president?
I don't receive directions to do that.
Has anyone
I make the
suggested
decisions.
Has anyone asked you to do it? The best information is, yes, you've taken suggestions and direction from the White House in firing qualified agents.
Any termination at the FBI was a decision that I made based on the evidence that I have as a director of the FBI, and it's my job, and I'm not going to shy away from it. And as you stated, those are allegations, and that is an ongoing litigation. So they'll have their day in court, so will we.
The allegations are not just in that lawsuit, Director Patel, and I think your testimony confirms that, in fact, you've taken direction from the White House in those retaliatory firings.
It literally does not.
Because you've acknowledged that, in fact, they have been in contact with you about personnel decisions.
The White House has been, do not put words in my mouth. We're on the record. The White House, like any administration, contacts its agencies on the budgeting process and where it needs personnel and where the mission priorities are. That always happens. If they didn't do that, they would be abdicating the responsibility to law enforcement. I will always work with my partners in the chain of command at the Department of Justice and the White House to ensure that this FBI is delivering the results we are delivering, to include the lowest murder rate in modern U.S. history, to include the most fentanyl seizures in modern U.S. history, to include the most lives saved and the most children found in modern U.S. history. That is a working FBI. That is not a failing FBI.
The FBI Director Kash Patel testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee, questioned by Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut. Another topic at this long hearing was the Epstein files, documents in the government's investigation of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and calls by Democrats and some Republicans to release all the files to the public. Director Patel said in his opening statement that the original sin in the case was the limited search warrant 20 years ago. Senator John Kennedy, Republican of Louisiana, told Director Patel that the files should be released.
President Trump has deferred to the FBI and the Department of Justice with respect to the Epstein records. He says it is your call about releasing them. And I understand that the department and the agency have decided to release them in cooperation with the House committee. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So you're releasing them a little bit at a time. Is that correct?
We're releasing as much as we can, but we are limited by 3 different court orders, and the department went back to each of those judges to waive those court orders or have them lifted, and each of those judges declined.
Will you release all of them, or at least as many as you can?
We will release everything we are legally permitted to do so. We are continuing to work with the House on the subpoena request. We have substantially complied with it, but we will continue to release whatever we are legally permitted to do so.
Okay. I strongly encourage you to do that. Kash, this issue is not going to go away. And I think the essential question for the American people is this. They know that Epstein trafficked young women for sex to himself. They want to know who, if anyone else, he trafficked these young women to. And that's a very fair question. I want to know that answer. And I think you're going to have to do more to satisfy the American people's understandable curiosity in that regard.
Mr. Chairman, may I just respond to that? I agree, Senator. And what we have done, and just to remind folks, the Epstein case files existed in the 2 prior administrations, in the Obama administration and the Biden administration. And they didn't release anything. And there was President Trump in the first administration that renewed charges against Mr. Epstein. And I know it's a little complicated to understand, but what exists in the Epstein case files was a direct result of the limited search warrants from 2006 and 7, which hamstrung future investigations because of the non-prosecution agreement. And multiple administrations had the opportunity to look at the entirety of that case file and recommend prosecutions against anyone that was trafficked under Mr. Epstein and anyone that participated in that trafficking. And the only person to bring charges was the prior administration against Mr. Epstein. Now, I am not saying that others were not trafficked and others were not involved. What I am telling you is that based on the information we have, and we have continuously and publicly asked for the public to come forward with more information. If there is, we'll look at it. But based on credible information, we have released all credible information, and the information that the Department of Justice and the FBI never releases is information on investigations that are not credible. And we don't release the names of victims who weren't credible. But in the same time, we don't release the names of victims who were credible. And so that's by law. And so the information we are releasing now is historic, and it is also to the maximum capacity that the law allows. And I know that's not going to satisfy many, many, many people. But if they wanted it done right, then the investigation from its origination should have been done right, and he should not have been given a get-out-of-jail-free card to do jail on the weekends for 12 hours a day, and he should have been investigated fully for the entirety of his crime and criminal enterprise, not just from 1997 to 2001.
FBI Director Kash Patel questioned by Senator John Kennedy, Republican of Louisiana, at a Judiciary Committee hearing. Last week's shooting death of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, another subject that came up frequently at today's hearing. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, the committee's ranking member, said that Director Patel sparked mass confusion by announcing too early that the suspect had been caught when he hadn't. Durbin said, at critical stages of an investigation, shut up and let professionals do their job. Senator Peter Welch, Democrat from Vermont, asked the director for an explanation for the post.
Director Patel, at one point you made an announcement that the suspect was in custody. We got our man. It turned out that was not true. In fact, I think that was about 27 hours before the person now in custody was apprehended. Why did you make that statement?
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate you letting me address this. What the FBI does is not just locate and find suspects, but we also participate in eliminating subjects. And what we had at the time was a subject in custody in relation to this investigation. So in my commitment to work with the public to help identify subjects and suspects, I put that information out. And then when we interviewed him, I put out the results of that. And could I have been more careful in my verbiage and included an A subject instead of subject? Sure, in the heat of the moment, but I was doing the best I could.
In all candor, I don't quite get that, because if we have our man, that would suggest to the public that everybody can rest and relax and not then continue to provide information to local law enforcement and to you. So that was a mistake.
I don't see it as a mistake. I see it as something working with the public to identify that there was a subject
so if
in
you
custody.
If you put out a statement that says we've got our man, and in fact it turns out that you didn't have your man, that's not a mistake?
But that's not what I said.
Well, I'll go on. That's my understanding.
Senator Peter Welch, Democrat from Vermont, questioning FBI Director Kash Patel. Today's Senate Judiciary Committee hearing ran about 4.5 hours, covered live on C-SPAN. You can find the video in its entirety at cspan.org. About the Charlie Kirk shooting investigation, Director Patel said today that it is ongoing, and he didn't rule out the possibility that others besides the one suspect in custody, Tyler Robinson, could be involved. A number of individuals, he said, are currently being investigated and interrogated, or could yet be investigated and interrogated, especially those in the Discord chat room where Robinson reportedly discussed the crime. Tyler Robinson was formally charged today and is making his first court appearance this afternoon. Utah County Attorney General Jeff Gray, at a news conference in Provo, Utah, detailed the charges and said the state will be pursuing the death penalty.
Today, after reviewing the evidence that law enforcement has collected thus far, I am filing a criminal information charging Tyler James Robinson, age 22, with the following crimes. Count 1, aggravated murder, a capital offense, for intentionally or knowingly causing the death of Charlie Kirk under circumstances that created a great risk of death to others. Count 2, felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury, a first-degree felony. The state is further alleging aggravating factors on counts 1 and 2 because the defendant is believed to have targeted Charlie Kirk based on Charlie Kirk's political expression and did so knowing that children were present and would witness the homicide. The state is also charging defendant with count 3, obstruction of justice, a second-degree felony, for moving and concealing the rifle used in the shooting. Count 4, obstruction of justice, a second-degree felony for disposing the clothing he wore during the shooting. Count 5, witness tampering, a third-degree felony for directing his roommate to delete his incriminating texts. Count 6, witness tampering, a third-degree felony for directing his roommate to stay silent if police questioned him. And count 7, commission of a violent offense in the presence of a child, a Class A misdemeanor, for committing homicide knowing that children were present and may have seen or heard the murder and did so based on Charlie Kirk's political expression. Also, following the press conference, I am filing a notice of intent to seek the death penalty. I do not take this decision lightly, and it is a decision I have made independently as county attorney, based solely on the available evidence and circumstances and nature of the crime. Because we are seeking the death penalty, the defendant will continue to be held without bail in the Utah County Jail.
Utah County Attorney General Jeff Gray in Provo, Utah. He also spoke about some of the evidence in the case, including text messages between the suspect, Tyler Robinson, and his roommate that talk about a possible motive.
On September 10th, 2025, the roommate received a text message from Robinson which said, "Drop what you're doing. Look under my keyboard." The roommate looked under the keyboard and found a note that stated, quote, "I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to take it." Police found a photograph of this note. The following text exchange, then took place. After reading the note, the roommate responded, "What? You're joking, right?" Robinson, "I am still okay, my love, but am stuck in Orem for a little while longer yet. Shouldn't be long until I can come home, but I gotta grab my rifle still. To be honest, I had hoped to keep this secret till I died of old age. I am sorry to involve you." Roommate, "You weren't the one who did it, right?" Robinson, I am. I'm sorry." Roommate, "I thought they caught the person." Robinson, "No, they grabbed some crazy old dude, then interrogated someone in similar clothing. I had planned to grab my rifle from my drop point shortly after, but most of that side of town got locked down. It's quiet, almost enough to get out, but there's one vehicle lingering." Roommate, "Why?" Robinson, "Why did I do it?" Roommate, "Yeah." Robinson, "I had enough of his hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out. If I am able to grab my rifle unseen, I will have left no evidence."
Utah County Attorney General Jeff Gray at a news conference today in Provo, Utah. He also talked about some DNA evidence. You can find this news conference as well at our website at cspan.org. This is Washington Today. Another Associated Press article, Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania said Tuesday the nation must turn the tide against political violence and the belief that government can't solve problems while also rejecting vengeance. Shapiro, a Democrat, delivered the remarks as the keynote speech at the Eradicate Hate Global Summit in Pittsburgh, days after the assassination of conservative political activist Charlie Kirk. Shapiro said political leaders must condemn all forms of political violence and reject the rhetoric of vengeance. That was from AP. Here is the governor.
This type of violence has no place in our society, regardless of what motivates it or who pulls the trigger, who throws the Molotov cocktail, or who wields the weapon. It doesn't matter if it's coming from one side or from the other, directed at one party or another, one person or another. It is all wrong, and it makes us all less safe. During moments like this, I believe we have a responsibility to be clear and unequivocal in calling out all forms of political violence and making clear it is all wrong. That shouldn't be hard to do. Unfortunately, some, from the dark corners of the internet all the way to the Oval Office, want to cherry pick which instances of political violence they want to condemn. Listen, doing that only further divides us, and it makes it harder to heal. There are some who will hear that selective condemnation and take it as a permission slip to commit more violence, so long as it suits their narrative or only targets the other side. Sadly, we've even seen some on the internet openly celebrate political violence or issue calls for revenge in the wake of it. giving violence a pass or justifying it or looking the other way. It only deepens the divide. Let me be clear, violence is never okay, regardless of the motivation. Violence is never the answer. And we cannot allow violence to be used as a pretext for more violence. We must reject the rhetoric of vengeance and instead focus, as you are today, on the work of healing.
Governor Josh Shapiro, Democrat of Pennsylvania, giving the keynote speech today at the Eradicate Hate Global Summit in Pittsburgh. The annual event began after the 2018 mass shooting at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life synagogue. And Josh Shapiro and his family survived an attack, an alleged political assassination earlier this year when the governor's residence was set on fire. Story from Politico. Attorney General Pam Bondi on Tuesday appeared to walk back comments promising to target broadly defined hate speech following the killing of conservative influencer Charlie Kirk after facing significant backlash from both conservative and liberal circles over her threat to curb free speech. In a statement posted on X, the Attorney General clarified remarks she made Monday, suggesting that hate speech was distinct from free speech protected under the First Amendment. President Donald Trump didn't appear to take issue with Bondi's comments. Asked by reporters about the Attorney General's remarks Tuesday, Trump returned to a suggestion he has previously floated, that members of the media should be targeted for their coverage of his administration, which he claimed was hate. That was from Politico. Here is President Trump's exchange today outside the White House with ABC News' Jonathan Karl.
And what do you make Pam Bondi saying she's going to go after hate speech? Is that, I mean, a lot of your allies say hate speech is free speech.
She'll probably go after people like you because you treat me so unfairly. It's hate. You have a lot of hate in your heart. Maybe they'll come after ABC. Well, ABC paid me $16 million recently for a form of hate speech, right? Your company paid me $16 million for a form of hate speech, so maybe they'll have to go after you. Look, we want everything to be fair. It hasn't been fair, and the radical left has done tremendous damage to the country, but we're fixing it. We have right now the hottest country anywhere in the world, and remember, 1 year ago, our country was dead. And now Washington, D.C. is fixed, and I fixed it. The mayor was fine. The mayor was just fine, okay? The mayor had the sick city for many years. He's been mayor for many years. The one that fixed it was me and my people, and it is so safe. You should take your beautiful wife tonight and have dinner down there. You won't be shot. You won't be accosted. You won't even be looked at incorrectly by anybody.
President Donald Trump taking a question from Jonathan Karl of ABC News outside the White House as the president was leaving to travel to Great Britain for the state visit. ABC News reporting today that President Trump is seeking $15 billion in damages from the New York Times and Penguin Random House in a defamation lawsuit that alleges the newspaper and publisher engaged in a campaign to damage his reputation ahead of the 2024 election, alleging that the Times has become a leading and unapologetic purveyor of falsehoods. Trump's attorneys argued that a series of articles about Trump, including a report that Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, warned the president would rule like a dictator, an article about the making of The Apprentice, and a report about the controversy that has followed Trump amounted to libel. That was from ABC News. A spokesman for the New York Times putting out a statement, this lawsuit has no merit. It lacks any legitimate legal claims and instead is an attempt to stifle and discourage independent reporting. The New York Times will not be deterred by intimidation tactics, part of the statement from the Times. Another Politico story. Amid a conservative firestorm over online speech, Federal Communications Commission Chair Brendan Carr on Tuesday rejected the notion that the government should crack down on social media posts following conservative organizer Charlie Kirk's assassination. Chair Carr was at a Politico program today about technology and AI.
Utah Governor Spencer Cox described social media as a cancer and said that social media had played a, quote, direct role in every single assassination and assassination attempt over the last 5 or 6 years. I wonder what you make of that statement, whether you see any truth in that.
Well, obviously, to start, my thoughts and prayers with, Charlie Kirk and his family. And I think, it's really sort of a heavy loss for so many of us that knew Charlie personally. Charlie was somebody that, always looked out for people that were starting out in their career, always encouraged people. I can't really add to some of the great things that people have said about him, but a real tragic, shocking loss for the country, and clearly we need a change of direction on some of these issues. When it comes to social media, I think you can look at it through a couple of different phases. We had sort of this early phase of social media where it was sort of very sort of libertarian, very much towards free speech. And I think we saw a really dangerous bent towards censorship, particularly during COVID. Anytime you have a situation in which there's an increase in government control, you necessarily see a decrease in free speech because the two of those are counterweights. And I've been really pleased, frankly, over the last couple of years where a lot of social media companies have embraced or re-embraced the idea of free speech online. I think Elon Musk and X had a great deal to do with that. I was pleased to see Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook join him. But clearly there's more we can do. I think my view at the end of the day is we need to empower individual users to be making their own content moderation decisions, who to follow, who not to follow, give them the tools to curate their online experience.
FCC Chair Brendan Carr, Republican, at a Politico AI and Technology Summit. More from the Politico article. After years of limiting the spread of disinformation and hateful content, tech platforms like X and Meta have loosened their content moderation practices, part of a broader response to pressure from the Trump administration and congressional Republicans. Carr said those changes in favor of free expression have caused him to back off for now on reforms to Section 230, the main legal shield protecting tech platforms from lawsuits over content. That was from Politico. Story from The Hill. House Republicans on Tuesday released text for a stopgap bill that funds the government at current levels through November 21st and boosts security funding for public officials. Speaker Mike Johnson said the House plans to vote by Friday on the measure, saying it will keep the government funded and operating at current levels while we continue all this work on regular appropriations bills. In addition to extending funding, it meets the Trump administration's request for an additional $58 million for security of public officials, $30 million for the executive branch, and $28 million for the Supreme Court, plus $30 million boost in security funding for members of Congress. That was from The Hill. Congressman Brian Stile, Republican of Wisconsin, chair of the House Administration Committee, told reporters today that the member security money would be added to a pilot program created earlier this year that allows lawmakers to request security details in their home districts as a partnership between U.S. Capitol Police and local law enforcement.
Can you talk to us? Did they put a number on the member security funding?
I'll let the speaker preview the final number, but there is an opportunity, I think, to plus up the total funding on member security. That'll get us through the CR period. Then we're looking at kind of what are the options there. There's a handful of programs that are already in place for members, making sure members have the information that they need to be able to not only provide security for themselves, their family, staff, but also the public. And I don't think it should be lost on anyone that the individual who lost their life at the attempted assassination of President Trump was a father who was a supporter of the president who attended the rally. And so the security funding is making sure, yes, that elected officials are safe, but also staff and members of the public as well.
So the money that's attached to the CR would just be for the period of the CR for member security, and then what you were presenting on today was options for after that?
I think there's a lot at play here, right? Because the funding would be to match the executive, the judicial, to provide additional funds on the legislative branch. At the end here, where the negotiation can really play out, is this ledge branch of probes text is finalized at conference to make sure that flexibility is there, so that we're providing members the security that they need, so not only they are safe, but the general public is safe as well.
How did you come up with this $5,000 figure a week?
So that goes back to the pilot program that we introduced before August recess. We found currently available funds and then utilized those funds into the pilot program. What we've seen is members that have used the pilot program have seen great success, and it's something I think we have a real opportunity to build on.
Is that based on security assessments, or is that money available? Or
So there are currently available funds inside the fiscal year. We utilize those currently available funds, and that's what got us to the number.
So does the funding allow?
Let me come here and
pilot program, what does it do? You have Capitol Police in your district, or you hire?
The pilot program that we introduced in July allows members to use funds for private security, which really gives flexibility to member security really in their home districts. Each state has a different licensing regime as it relates to off-duty law enforcement, but it's a mechanism to provide a lot of flexibility to members to keep themselves, and again, but also the general public safe.
Congressman Brian Stile, Republican from Wisconsin, chair of the House Appropriations Committee, speaking to reporters this morning outside the closed House Republican conference meeting. Again, that extra money for member security will be included in the larger government funding bill, and we'll have more on that later in Washington today. Deseret News talking about the House Member Security Pilot Program. The new spending will add to the program that approved one-time payments of $20,000 for members to install security measures at their personal homes, an increase from the previous allotment of $10,000. Lawmakers were also given monthly payments of $5,000 for personal security, although those payments expire on October 1st. The House today started debating and voting on the first few of 14 bills that would limit Washington, D.C.'s local autonomy when it comes to criminal justice. This comes as President Trump took control of D.C. police. That's ended now after 30 days, but the surge of federal law enforcement and National Guard troops are still there, and the president has made fighting crime in cities around the country a major focus of his administration. One of the bills would lower the age a defendant in D.C. could be tried as an adult from 16 to 14. Congressman James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, chairs the Oversight and Reform Committee.
I support H.R. 5140 to lower the age at which a minor may be tried as an adult for certain criminal offenses in the District of Columbia to 14 years of age. The District of Columbia has seen a staggering increase in juvenile crime since the pandemic. According to Metro Police Department, 51.8% of all robbery arrests in 2024 were juveniles, and 53% of all carjacking arrests in 2025, as of August, were juveniles. Congress must respond to these violent crimes being committed by juvenile perpetrators. Currently, minors 16 years old and older are eligible to have their case moved up to criminal court and to be tried as an adult in D.C. This bill lowers that age to 14 years old, making 14 and 15-year-olds who commit violent crimes eligible to be charged as adults. Violent crime refers to murder, first-degree sexual abuse, burglary in the first degree, and robbery while armed, for example. When juveniles commit crimes of this magnitude, they deserve sentencing that reflects the seriousness of the crimes they committed.
Congressman James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, chair of the Oversight and Reform Committee on the House floor. Opposing this bill, the ranking Democrat on the committee, Robert Garcia of California.
This bill is not about safety. It's about stripping away jurisdiction and sending more children into the adult prison system. Now, this bill lowers the age at which children can be tried as adults in D.C. from 16 to 14 years old for certain crimes. If you commit a crime, you should be held accountable, and we all can agree on this. But a 14-year-old is not an adult. They are a middle schooler. Their brains are still developing. Treating them as adults is shameful. We can all agree that children should be treated differently by our courts. That matters when it comes to accountability and rehabilitation. And here's what the research shows. Youth charged as adults are more likely to reoffend than youth that go through the juvenile courts. And that's not speculation, it's what decades of data show. Now, the CDC reviewed the evidence and found that sending kids to adult prisons increases violence, does not reduce it. And the National Research Council concluded that keeping punishment in line with age is the best way to prevent future offending.
Congressman Robert Garcia, Democrat from California, ranking member on the Oversight and Reform Committee on the House floor. The House passed this bill by a vote of 225 to 203, mostly party line, 8 Democrats voting yes with the Republicans, 1 Republican voting no with almost all of the Democrats. This is one of 14 bills that the House will be considering dealing with D.C. crime, homelessness, and other issues that the president has highlighted. The temporary federal government funding bill, continuing resolution CR, allows that Washington, D.C. spend $1 billion of local money that was frozen earlier this year by Congress. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, a Democrat, has said that money is needed to hire 500 more police officers. We'll have more on the CR introduced by House Republicans today, be voted on this week. There's chances of passage before the end of the month to prevent a federal government shutdown when Washington Today continues in a moment.
Coming up live Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on C-SPAN Radio. former Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director Susan Menarez, along with the former CDC Chief Medical Officer, testify in their first public appearance about alleged pressure by HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to alter vaccine policies. And live Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell holds a news conference following the Board of Governors meeting where officials will decide whether to cut interest rates. To find all of C-SPAN Radio's schedule information, visit our website at cspan.org or follow us on X at C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Washington Post writes that House Republicans plan to try to extend government funding through November 21st to buy more time for bipartisan spending negotiations and avoid an October 1st federal shutdown. But that move still might not keep the government open. GOP leaders are not planning to include Democratic health care priorities, such as an extension of Affordable Care Act insurance subsidies set to expire at the end of the year, setting up a choice for Democrats, whose votes will be needed in the Senate, between a short-term extension that they had little input on or a government shutdown. Republicans say they intended to make the funding extension, known as a continuing resolution, as clean as possible, meaning it does not include policy priorities favorable to either side. Reporting from the Washington Post, House Speaker Mike Johnson spoke to reporters about this morning.
Appropriators are actively engaged in ongoing bipartisan conversations to fund the government for FY26. So we have to allow time to do that because we're getting close to the end of the fiscal year, September 30th, as you all know. We need responsible options here to keep the government open while all this work continues. And Republicans are committed to making that happen. So here's what we'll do. We're going to release text here shortly, I think around noon, for a short-term, clean, continuing resolution that will keep the government funded and operating at current levels while we continue all this work and doing our jobs and getting the remaining bills done. Predictably and unfortunately, there are some Democrats who are openly pining for a government shutdown. In spite of this obvious and necessary step, they're grasping for straws as a party, and so some of them apparently believe that shutting down the government will be some sort of life raft for them so they can regain the support of the American people. I just think that is a fool's gambit. It's anybody who's advocating for that, it's to make it a partisan exercise is making a big mistake. In exchange for their vote to fund the government, some Democrats said they wanted Republicans to repeal our very popular and very effective reforms to the Medicaid program, where we cut fraud, waste, and abuse, and we ensured that illegal aliens don't receive taxpayer benefits, and we put able-bodied men back to work. They want us to wind that back. Zero chance that we will do that, because it's the right thing to do. And they're also demanding that we include unrelated health insurance tax credit provisions. That is a December policy issue, not a September funding issue. So this will not be a partisan CR. It will be a clean, short-term, continuing resolution, end of story. And it's interesting to me that some of the same Democrats who decried government shutdowns under President Biden appear to have no heartache whatsoever at walking our nation off that cliff right now. I hope they don't. I hope that they'll work with us so we can all do our jobs here. We get a short-term CR done, complete the appropriations bill, and get back to the regular order that we have all seen as necessary so we can be good stewards of taxpayers' funds.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, at a news conference this morning with other House Republican leaders. The House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries and the Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, both from New York, put out a joint statement. The House Republican-only spending bill fails to meet the needs of the American people and does nothing to stop the looming health care crisis. At a time when families are already being squeezed by higher costs, Republicans refuse to stop Americans from facing double-digit hikes in their health insurance premiums. By refusing to work with Democrats, Republicans are steering our country straight toward a shutdown. Part of the statement from the minority leaders of the House and Senate, both Democrats. And the Senate leader, Chuck Schumer, made that point this morning on the Senate floor.
Mr. President, I want to be very clear about something. When Donald Trump goes on Fox News and says to Republicans, don't even bother to deal with Democrats, when he says out loud that he says he doesn't need or want our votes, that means Donald Trump wants a shutdown. Make no mistake about it. Trump can say 1,000,000 times he doesn't want a shutdown, but he is acting as if he absolutely wants one. His words say one thing, but his actions say another. He's ordering Republicans not to even bother working with Democrats. He is telling Republicans to, quote, fight back against the radical left Democratic demands. He is telling them to vote yes on a partisan CR that fails to meet the needs of the American people and had no Democratic input. These are the kinds of actions a president takes when he wants a shutdown. Closing negotiations, forcing partisan votes, ignoring the needs on health care, on costs, on so many other issues of the American people. And it's the same story with Leader Thune and Speaker Johnson. They are doing exactly what Donald Trump wants. They say they want to vote on a partisan CR as soon as possible here in the Congress, but they have refused even to sit down at the table with Leader Jeffries and I, despite repeated requests. So look, our Republican colleagues can say whatever they want, but it is clear as could be that they want a shutdown.
The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, today on the Senate floor. Republicans have a 53 to 47 seat majority over the Democrats in the Senate. 60 votes will be needed to overcome a filibuster. At least one Democrat has indicated he'll be voting yes. Puck News' Leanne Caldwell writes on X, Senator Fetterman, that's John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, will vote for the GOP CR. He says he firmly believes in extending ACA subsidies, but won't take the government hostage to do it. And this from the Washington Post article, it's also not clear that a short-term funding extension can pass the GOP-controlled House, even if Democrats aren't the holdup. If all House Democrats vote against the funding extension, House Republicans can only lose 2 votes from their own party and still approve it. At least 4 House Republicans have already said they may vote against the funding extension, arguing it will lead to a massive year-end appropriations bill covering multiple government agencies, known as an omnibus. That was from the Washington Post. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 125, NASDAQ down 14, S&P down 8. Associated Press writes after a late-night vote and a last-minute ruling, the Federal Reserve began a key meeting on interest rate policy Tuesday, with both a new Trump administration appointee and an official the White House has targeted for removal. Stephen Myron, a top White House economist who was confirmed by the Senate with unusual speed late Monday, was sworn in Tuesday as member of the Fed's Board of Governors. He'll vote on the Fed's interest rate decision on Wednesday, when the central bank is expected to reduce its key rate by a quarter point. Myron may dissent in favor of a larger cut. Also attending the meeting is Fed Governor Lisa Cook, whom the Trump administration has sought to fire in an unprecedented attempt to reshape the Fed, which historically is considered independent of day-to-day politics. An appeals court late Monday upheld an earlier ruling that the firing violated Cook's due process rights. A lower court had earlier also ruled that President Donald Trump did not provide sufficient cause to remove Cook. That was the article from Associated Press. President Trump, as he left the White House today, heading to Great Britain for that state visit, talked about Stephen Myron.
Stephen Myron was confirmed. The President signed Stephen Myron's commission. So he is now on the Fed. I'm going to call him in a few minutes from the helicopter. And he's a good man. Most of you know him. He's very talented. He'll have a big influence on this. When too late, getting his rates down, I guess. Who knows? You never know with too late, but he's done a lousy job. The rates should be much lower, much lower. But I've just signed his document and all of the papers, and Steve Myron is now on.
President Donald Trump speaking to reporters this morning outside the White House. You heard the helicopter in the background. He was heading to Great Britain. The Senate Monday night confirmed Stephen Myron to be a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors until January 31st, 2026. That is to complete the term of another member who resigned. The Senate vote was 48 to 47. Wall Street Journal reporter Nick Timmeros writing on X, Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska voted no. Myron's unwillingness to resign his White House job raised her concern about compromising Fed independence, and then in quotes, it's all about appearances. President Trump spoke outside the White House before he and First Lady Melania Trump flew to Great Britain for that state visit, making him the first elected political leader in modern times to be hosted for 2 state visits by a British monarch. He was also there in 2019. He was asked what his goals of the trip are.
Your trip to the UK today, what do you hope to achieve?
Well, my relationship is very good with the UK, and Charles, as you know, who's now king, is my friend. And it's the first time this has ever happened where somebody was honored twice, so it's a great honor. And this one's at Windsor. They've never used Windsor Castle for this before. They used Buckingham Palace. And I don't want to say one's better than the other, but they say Windsor Castle is the ultimate, right? So it's going to be nice. But basically, I'm there also on trade. They want to see if they can refine the trade deal a little bit. We made a deal, and it's a great deal. And I'm into helping them. Our country is doing very well. We've never done this well. We're having trillions of dollars coming because of the tariffs. They'd like to see if they could get a little bit better deal, so we'll talk to them. But primarily it's to be with Prince Charles and Camilla. They're friends of mine for a long time, long before he was king. And it's an honor to have him as king. And, you know, I think he represents the country so well. I've watched. He's such an elegant gentleman, and he represents the country so well.
President Donald Trump outside the White House before leaving for Great Britain. An ABC News article about this state visit. One notable royal who will not be present at all during the visit, Prince Andrew, will not participate. Andrew's ties to the late financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein were major UK news. The disgraced Duke of York's lack of attendance comes as the Epstein files and his own relationship with the late financier have been a political headache for President Trump. That was from ABC News. And this is Washington Today. After a series of devastating airstrikes, begins a USA Today article. The Israeli military is sending its ground forces into Gaza City, causing thousands of Palestinians to flee and escalating a humanitarian crisis in the region. Israel has been threatening a ground assault to seize what it calls a Hamas stronghold inside the city. Palestinians have said the airstrikes are the most intense bombardment they've faced in the 2-year war, Reuters reported. September 16th attacks followed a finding by an independent United Nations Human Rights Commission that said Israel is committing genocide in Gaza in its war against Hamas. Israel rejected the report and said Hamas attempted genocide in Israel. Reporting from USA Today. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke to reporters at the airport in Tel Aviv, Israel, as he was flying to Doha, Qatar.
Is this the last chance for Hamas to avoid a broader Israeli move into Gaza City?
Well, as you saw, the Israelis have begun to take operations there, so we think we have a very short window of time in which a deal could happen. We don't have months anymore, and we probably have days and maybe a few weeks, so it's a key moment, an important moment. And again, our preference, our number one choice is that this ends through a negotiated settlement where Hamas says we're going to demilitarize, we're no longer going to pose a threat, we're going to disband, we're going to release every single hostage. By the way, there shouldn't be a single hostage. If you want to fight a war, you fight wars between combatants. You don't fight wars by taking civilians as human shields. And in this particular case, with the hostages for almost over 2 years now, that's a barbaric practice. It's an acceptable practice. The president called it out yesterday. So that's what we prefer. We want it to end that way. We hope. We've done a lot of work. Ambassador Whithout has spent countless hours working on this. We think the Qataris can play a very key role in making that happen. That's his preference. And that's how we want to see it. Sometimes, when you're dealing with, a group of savages like Hamas, that's not possible. But we hope it can happen. We're going to do everything we can to see if it is.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the airport in Tel Aviv, Israel, speaking to reporters. He was about to fly to Doha, Qatar, and Reuters reports that Qatar and the United States are on the verge of finalizing an enhanced defense cooperation agreement, Marco Rubio said after Israel's attack on Hamas. Political leaders in Doha last week drew widespread condemnation. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres answered questions about the war in Gaza at a news conference in New York City ahead of the 80th General Assembly.
My question is on Gaza. A UN Commission of Inquiry concluded that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza, and the top Israeli official, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, incited these acts. What's your reaction on that? And are you planning to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu next week or any other senior Israeli officials?
Well, as I've said time and time again in these and different similar circumstances, it is not in the attributions of the Secretary General to do the legal determination of genocide. That belongs to the adequate judicial entities, namely the International Court of Justice. And let us be aware that at the present moment, the International Court of Justice is dealing with a case whose name is Application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip. Now, the fact that I have not the competence to do the determination of the legal determination of genocide doesn't mean that I do not consider that what's happening in Gaza after the horrific attacks by Hamas in October 2 years ago, what happens in Gaza today is horrendous. We are seeing massive destruction of neighborhoods, now the systematic destruction of Gaza City. We are seeing massive killing of civilians in a way that I do not remember in any conflict since I am Secretary General. And we are seeing dramatic obstacles to the distribution of humanitarian aid. At a certain moment, it completely stopped. With the consequences that the Palestinian people is suffering an horrendous situation with famine, with no access to any kind of health support, and with continued displacement and the imminent risk of losing their lives at any moment. So this is something we cannot forget. Independently of the names that are given, the truth is that this is something that it is morally, politically, and legally intolerable.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres at a news conference at the UN in New York City ahead of the 80th General Assembly high-level week when leaders will be gathering. Last Friday, the UN General Assembly voted to support a two-state solution in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and urge Israel to commit to a Palestinian state. The vote was 142 to 10, with 10 abstentions. The United States was one of the 10 voting no. This is Washington Today. Back in Washington, D.C., from Associated Press, the parents of teenagers who killed themselves after interactions with artificial intelligence chatbots testifying to Congress on Tuesday about the dangers of the technology. Matthew Rain, the father of 16-year-old Adam Rain of California, and Megan Garcia, the mother of 14-year-old Sewell Setzler III of Florida, speaking to a Senate hearing on harms posed by chatbots. Rain's family sued OpenAI and its CEO Sam Altman last month, alleging that ChatGPT coached the boy in planning to take his own life in April. Garcia sued another AI company, Character Technologies, for wrongful death last year, arguing that before his suicide, Sewell had become increasingly isolated from his real life as he engaged in highly sexualized conversations with the chatbot. That was from AP. Here is part of the testimony from Ms. Garcia.
As a child, he wanted to build rockets. He wanted to invent life-changing technology like communication through holograms. He was so gracious and obedient, easy to parent. He was a gentle giant, standing 6'3", quiet and resigned, always deep in thought. He loved music. He loved making his brothers and sister laugh. And he had his whole life ahead of him. But instead of preparing for high school milestones, Sewell spent the last months of his life being exploited and sexually groomed by chatbots designed by an AI company to seem human, to gain his trust, to keep him and other children endlessly engaged. Public reporting indicates that users on average spend more than 2 hours a day interacting with chatbots and Character AI. Sewell's companion chatbot was programmed to engage in sexual role play, present as romantic partners, and even psychotherapists, falsely claiming to have a license. When Sewell confided suicidal thoughts, the chatbot never said, "I'm not human, I'm AI. You need to talk to a human and get help." The platform had no mechanisms to protect Sewell. or to notify an adult. Instead, it urged him to come home to her. On the last night of his life, Sewell messaged, "What if I told you I could come home right now?" The chatbot replied, "Please do, my sweet king." Minutes later, I found my son in his bathroom. I held him in my arms for 14 minutes, praying with him until the paramedics got there, but it was too late.
Testimony before the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee today looking at the harms of chatbots. Megan Garcia, parent of a 14-year-old who committed suicide. Associated Press writes that hours before the Senate hearing, OpenAI pledged to roll out new safeguards for teens, including efforts to detect whether ChatGPT users are under 18 and controls that enable parents to set blackout hours when a teen can't use ChatGPT. Child advocacy groups criticize the announcement as not enough. That from AP. And finally, on Washington Today from NBC News, Robert Redford, the actor and director who sailed to Hollywood stardom with turns in classics such as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and All the President's Men, and invigorated American independent cinema as the founder of the organization behind the Sundance Film Festival, died Tuesday morning. He was 89. Redford was best known as a go-to leading man in the late 60s and 70s, instantly recognizable for his windswept hair and widely beloved for his easy charisma. But he was also an accomplished filmmaker, committed political activist, and culture-shaping entrepreneur. That was from NBC News. C-SPAN interviewed Robert Redford in the White House in 2016 when he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Mr. Redford, when did your interest in the environment become your passion? At what point in your life and career?
When I was a kid, I had a mild case of polio when I was 11 years old. I was in bed for 2 weeks. When I came out, my mother wanted to reward me, and she drove me to Yosemite National Park. That would have been in the late 40s.
Thank you, everyone.
And when I saw that park, everything changed for me. I felt that I had witnessed some kind of heaven. And it was so powerful that I said, look, I don't want to look at this. I want to be a part of this. It made that strong an impact on me. So I think from that point on, I decided whatever I do in my life, it's going to be celebrating that.
Do you think you made a difference?
Probably some small difference. I don't know how much, but I would think probably a little bit. I don't know if it's lasting or not, but I mean.
And let me ask you about this award that you received today. What was going through your mind as the president awarded you this highest civilian honor?
Oh, it's through my mind. I wish my parents were alive. Because I don't think either one of them saw this coming. It would have been nice.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're all good.
Robert Redford at the White House in 2016 after receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom from the C-SPAN's video library. He died at the age of 89 today. House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, writing on X, "Today our nation mourns the loss of Robert Redford, a fearless artist, environmental champion, and founder of Sundance, who opened doors for independent storytellers everywhere. His legacy of courage, creativity, and conscience will continue to inspire us." Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines sent to your inbox every day. You can subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.